everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents here on Amazon Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. Also want to welcome those tuning in on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter today for a very special broadcast we have for you guys. If you're joining us on the Amazon Live side, welcome to you. If you have not done so already, make sure you guys hit that follow button. You'll see it either here in this corner or down below. Also, you will see the books by our next guest. I'm excited to welcome Rosalie T to our broadcast today. We've had some great conversations on the radio broadcast you guys can catch here on Amazon Music, but today we're discussing her brand new book called Layers of Truth. You guys can see it there. We also have it highlighted for you guys in the carousel on the Amazon side. You also will see the first book that Rosalie and I talked about, which was March with Me. We'll talk to her about the work she's been able to do when it comes to writing historical fiction, but also sharing some great messages as well. Rosalie, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Okay, I had lost you.
Okay. Okay. How you doing, Rosalie? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Yeah, it seemed to have frozen up a little bit there, but I think we're going to be okay. Rosalie, thank you so much again for being with us. As I mentioned, we just had a great conversation on the radio side discussing your book, Layers of Truth. What I love about this is you're able to share these great characters with these important moments in history. What has it been like for you, Rosalie, to already see the response to the book?
Would you please speak? What did you say, Cyrus?
Yeah. No, I was just saying, what has it been like for you to see the response to the book already?
Well, it's been really a lot of fun. Been in touch with me after reading it, and um, I feel like people that read it do get engaged with the history. Important.
And the history that you talk about in the book, Rosalie, and I should read the subtitle of the book, is a novel set during the turbulent 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. You're able to take us into an interesting part of not only our history as far as a country, but also our thoughts as individuals. And you share that really big in the book, how depending on where people lived during the time, they may have looked at a situation different. What has that been like for you to have that conversation with people? How geographically split people were and how they looked at the world they lived in.
Well, the interesting thing about that time was that Freedom Summer was a movement when about 1,000 Northern college students, mostly whites, came to work with a Black grassroots organization, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so having these white college students come down and work and live in the Black communities um, was such an interesting mix for them and brought them out of their bubble. And so I think people reading the book can realize that there are different areas of our country that provide different experiences and still do to this day.
Right. Such a great point. And I want people to know, even though it is historical fiction, you really do take us into some real life examples of things that were going on at the time during the 1960s, and also how a lot of this had to do with better understanding how the times were impacting people. So let's talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind, Rosalie. For people who are just discovering you, where did your interest in this time period come from?
Well, I think I've always been interested in history. And as a high school student, I read Lil Ann Smith's Killers of the Dream. And I was a white Northern person at that time. And I was so horrified to see this different element of our country. And I think that has always been in my core as I went through life, and have often worked in inner city areas. And when I started working on historical fiction, my first was Freedom Bound, about an enslaved person who came from Africa in 1800, and later ran the plantation, Kingsley Plantation in Florida. And her life was so amazing. I think that hooked me on um, doing the research. And then when I did the research for March with Me, which brought me to the current, more current history of the 1960s. We lived in Birmingham at the time, and no one seemed to know about the Children's March, which was such an important event in our country's history when uh, Bull Connor turned the hoses and the dogs on the young children who were marching. And that is what really got us the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so I think that doing the research for that book is what absolutely got me involved in civil rights movement history of the 60s. From that point, writing that book led to my lecturing at Texas A&M University of Commerce, Texas, my husband's alma mater. And that led us to leading student groups from there on civil rights movement tours of history of Alabama, and later on of Mississippi, where we also lived. And so I think I just, over the years since that first book of March with Me, I have just become so involved in studying and learning, and I'm still learning all the time. And my husband is joining me on this venture, and so we we're just constantly talking about that history or reading about it and sharing. And there's so much to learn. And what's appalling is that we see some of the problems that existed in those days existing still today, or coming in more into focus today. And so I think it's a very timely reminder of what is happening in our country.
Such a great point. You and I talked about that, Rosalie, in our recent conversation for the radio show. I want to say, for those who are just coming in, I see you guys over there on the Facebook side. Hello to you. Also, those tuning in on Amazon Live, we welcome you, as well as YouTube. I see you guys over there as well. You all are watching Cyrus Webb Presents. Rosalie T. Turner is our guest for today's segment. We have two of her books in the carousel on the Amazon side. As she was just talking, I highlighted March with Me for you guys. You guys can be able to get the print edition of that book, really timely book. But her newest book is what we're talking about mainly today. It's called Layers of Truth. You guys can see it there. I'm going to read a section from the book here in a moment and talk to Rosalie about it. But Rosalie, to the point you just made, when you and I talked about this in our recent radio interview, history is so important. Growing up and going to school, I enjoyed learning about history because I love learning about things I don't know. I'm also interested in things that came before me because I think we can either learn things that we can do or things that we should avoid. There's been a lot of conversation recently about history. You mentioned about, in many ways, history repeating itself. Do you think part of the danger we're seeing today, Rosalie, is that if we don't know the history, then we are destined to repeat it?
That is so true, Cyrus. And I think that we're having this pushback about learning the history, which is it's just tragic and ridiculous, because we need to know that history, especially now. And I think that it's very dangerous on our part, of those of us who know the history, to let this slide, let this time slide, and let books be banned and not teach things in the school or in other places, so that young people have an opportunity to learn what has happened. And the people in the 60s especially were putting their lives on the line to get us rights, the right to vote, especially in Mississippi, was such a dangerous time, trying to just register to vote if you were Black. And yet they were willing to try that. And we just have to honor that and not let this go back, where we're pushing back on our voting rights abilities and opportunities.
One of the characters that we'll meet in the book is Lenore. Talk to us about Lenore. What was it like for you to bring her to life, Rosalie, in Layers of Truth? and the complications that she faced where she came from, but also what she was able to see when she came down to the South.
Well, Lenore is one of my favorite characters because she grew a lot during this summer she spent in Freedom Summer. She was a Northern college student who came down, supposedly thinking that she would, help these other people get registered to vote, something like that. But what she learned was how important um, that effort was and what it was like to live among in the Black community and in homes that did not have indoor plumbing, and learn that there was a life beyond her bubble of this privileged northern place that she came from. Um, and she did learn. It was hard for her. She struggled a lot throughout the book as she learned different things. And she ultimately, over years, well, I won't tell everything about Lenore. People can read the book about her.
Right.
But she was an example of what we all need to do as we move forward, learning and trying to understand and trying to see things beyond our own, um, as I call it, a bubble.
Mhm. And I'm going to go back to that because I think that's one of the interesting things about Lenore that I appreciated. But also, as she was going through this journey, as she got to know the people that she was really meeting, and I think that's the thing too about us today in 2023, Rosalie. And I'm curious as to your thoughts about this because I should let our audience know. Rosalie was just telling me before we went on here, she just came back from a trip with a group of students. Being able to share some of this history with others. Lenore does that too in the book. What has it been like for you to see the curiosity that's there today, Rosalie, about the history, but also the appreciation for it too that's building?
Well, what we found, as my husband and I would lead these tours, this isn't something we do commercially. We just do this because we care about sharing the history. And it started with university students, and we do those every year. And we find the students interested and eager. And as the week goes on, it's a week long tour, um, they become more engaged. And from here in North Carolina, where we live now, we've just gotten back from taking a group of adults on this, and it becomes a pilgrimage. We decided we after starting this tour this time we couldn't call it a tour. It was a pilgrimage because they were learning and they were caring, and it was just a very enlightening experience. And often on our we have had my husband and I have had students especially come up to us and say this was a life-changing event for us because we did not know this. We didn't know what our grandparents went through. And this last trip we were on with the students to Mississippi, they were leaving and we'd said goodbye and they were walking to the bus. And this one young man stopped and he ran back to us and hugged us with tears in his eyes. And he said, "This has changed my life forever." These students are eager and willing and ready to learn, as are the adults.
Are you finding those situations like what Lenore found in the book, Rosalie, where individuals who should be notable for their achievements are not as known to some today that have the ability to know about them thanks to things like Google?
Yes, and I'm always encouraging people to Google this person or Google that person because there are so many, and that's why we have Black History Month, which started back in the 1920s with Carter Woodson and Woodhouse, and because as a week because he felt that nobody knew these important people who had built this country, and really and truly, blacks built this country. Literally, they built the White House and the Capitol. They built the roads and the infrastructure, the railroads, and then there were the important personages that made contributions that are not commonly known. And then there's a whole other layer, which is what prompted me to write Layers of Truth, of the foot soldiers who are not, who will never be known. And I wanted to tell their names because I think they're so important.
Yeah, such a great point. I want to talk about another care. I'm going to come back to Lenore, Rosalie, and I want to say for those who are on the Amazon Live side, you can be able to click on the book to go ahead and purchase your copy of it. It is available right now in paperback, as you guys can see it there. And we're going to tell you something special that Rosalie is doing as well with her proceeds from the book as well. But I want to talk about Luke for a moment, Rosalie, because there is this fascinating part in the book where he's kind of just thinking about himself, thinking about life, thinking about people who look like him, black men, black boys, and the desire just to be able to live. And that's to have you kind of share that story in the 1960s. That is exactly what we hear today in 2023 when you think about some of the conversation that's taking place. What was it like for you kind of share Luke's story in the book?
I hope to personify danger if you're stopped. Right? And Luke was a very vulnerable person in 1960 as a young black man. And there is that same situation today for young black men that feel that they are vulnerable and from that.
Let's see. Rosalie, can you hear me? Rosalie, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, we seem to have a little bit of a buffering going on there. I thought that was such an interesting conversation, though, for Luke to have with Lenore, but also I think for us to be able to have a conversation about. I asked you recently, Rosalie, about what type of book you saw this as. I introduced it as historical fiction. People have their own idea what to expect from fiction. When people pick up Layers of Truth, talk to our audience here about what you hope this book does for them.
Well, of course, I hope it's eye opening about what went on in the 60s and as an inspiration to make sure that we don't go back to that today. But um, as I've told you before, I love the history more than the novel part of it because um, I just am fanatic about the history, and anything in that book that is historical is absolutely true, exactly as it happened. I was fortunate to have foot soldiers to talk to verify that what I was writing was correct. And Charles McLaurin Mack, who is in the book, um, was a foot soldier in charge of the SNCC work in Sunflower County in Mississippi then. And we spent a lot of time with him. And he took us around and showed us everything that was, he'd say that this was a great place. And actually, the picture on the cover is a favorite of his because it shows what was his favorite juke joint, the one on the very far right with a red awning. So he's very happy with the cover. But I want to emphasize again that the historical part of this book is absolutely accurate. And so I wrote it because I want the history known, but writing it in novel form makes it perhaps an easier read, a less threatening book to pick up than some of the nonfiction ones that are so important that are out today that give us that history. Um, but it's a nice, easy way, and it's accessible for anyone from young adults, high school students on up, adults. I hope it will be read by book clubs and people, and I hope that when people read it, they will talk about what happened in the 60s and the importance of it, and make them look at what is happening today.
Yeah. Such a great thing and such a great conversation. I want to read this passage here dealing with Lenore in the book. For those who already have the book, it's found on page 184. You said this, and we should say that this part of the book is written in first person, so we're able to kind of get the feeling of what Lenore is feeling. You wrote this, Rosalie, again in Lenore's voice. Before I came to Mississippi, I lived in the real world, and the Deep South was the other world. Now all that had changed. Mississippi had become real to me, but it is so much more than the excitement of connecting with students, feeling the warmth of a family circle, the thrill of singing freedom songs, and the host of possibilities that the future held. It was also the world of a Luke who was the sum of generations of hurt and of knowing people who've been harassed, jailed, beaten, and murdered for no other reason than their race. Mississippi could never become other to me again. That to me is such a powerful passage in this book because I think for me, Rosalie, when I was reading that, I think a lot of people when they get to know one of the things I get a lot, Rosalie, when I tell people I'm from Mississippi, they're like, "Do you have airports there? Do you do this?" I mean, it's like they do see us as an other. What was it like for you to share that in the voice of Lenora, and then of course you'll be able to let us be able to see that.
Well, I think that it's very easy for a white person to think of other. Um, and I've talked to so many people who, now that we're in North Carolina, away from the Deep South, who feel that the Deep South is a different place, a different kind of place. And in many ways, it was very different in the 60s, but that is not to say that there was not the same kind of thing going on all across our country. We've lived in the Midwest. We found that to be an extremely racist area. Um, and racism occurs everywhere. And I think um, Lenore uh, becomes aware that there's so many subtleties to it as she goes through her summer there. And as we get to know people on an individual basis, then that breaks down barriers. And so that's why I think it's important for book clubs, for example, to talk with each other about these issues and perhaps break down some of the barriers and misconceptions that we have.
We have a comment from Beverly over on the Amazon Live side, Rosalie, and she says, Rosalie Turner is a gifted writer. I read her book, March with Me, and felt like I was there in the moment. I could taste the bitter coffee. I could hear the DJ on the radio giving the children the coded messages. It was time to leave school in March. She knows the people and their stories. Highly recommend. I just got a copy of Layers of Truth, eager to read it and understand the times and the courageous actions to make change for basic rights. When you hear comments like that, Rosalie, do you feel as though you're doing exactly what you wanted to do with books like this?
I do feel that way, and that is so rewarding. And I write. I think I told you this before. My mentor one time said to me, "A writer is someone who can't not write," and so I write, not thinking, "Oh, I want to get this out to everybody," but because this matters to me, and it's so rewarding when you find out that what you as an individual cared about is reaching someone else and touching other hearts, and that's the most rewarding part about writing.
When people finish Layers of Truth, and the book. I mean, the title is exactly what the story is. It really does show the layers of truth, the layers of history, but also the layers of importance of everyone's story. For me, Rosalie, what do you hope they remember about these characters and this time?
That's an excellent question, Cyrus, as most of yours are. um, I would hope that they would remember uh, what what it was like in our country when we were so um, polarized, and then look at our country today with the polarization that exists, and connect the dots, and see that there's things that we need to pay attention to today. We need to see what legislation is going on. We need to see who is being elected to our local positions like school board. Those are very important, and all that kind of thing. And to see that, I hope they take away just a big picture, that people worked so hard to get voting rights. People died trying to get voting rights, and that we have to honor that today. And we have to really be vigilant about what's going on in our country.
Well, it's a great read, Rosalie. I definitely enjoyed it. This was a great conversation. See, I told you once again, the time flies by. This is what happens when you're having a great conversation with a great individual like yourself. Again, everyone, Rosalie T. Turner has been our guest. The book is Layers of Truth. You all can see it there. It's available through our friends here on Amazon. You can also get, as Beverly did, her book March with Me. I'll highlight for you guys over there on the Amazon Live side. Make sure you guys pick it up. And Rosalie, as I mentioned, you're doing something special with your proceeds from the book. Let our audience know about that.
Well, I'm so excited about this because during Freedom Summer, that the book is about, that was when the Freedom Schools were born, out of necessity there to provide what the kids were not getting from the other schools. And ever since that time, and now all across our country, there are freedom schools run by the Children's Defense Fund. And this year, we're starting one here in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm so excited about it. And so I have pledged all my proceeds from the book to go to the Freedom Summer School, the Freedom School Project this summer here in Durham, North Carolina. And it's a wonderful project, and I'm just so proud to be able to be part of it.
Well, I'm excited for conversations like this and that we can be a part of the conversations, Rosalie, because not only is it a great book, it's a great message and work that you've committed yourself to. So, really appreciate that. Again, everyone, Rosalie Turner has been our guest. Make sure you guys get her books here on Amazon. And, Rosalie, it goes without saying, you're welcome back here anytime.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on, Cyrus. I always enjoy talking to you, and I enjoy following you on all the things you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we look forward to continue to spread the word about Layers of Truth. And we thank you, our audience, for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.